Hi everyone, and welcome back to the final video of the Theological Foundations class. In this video, we'll finish our brief survey of the major Bible doctrines. And it's appropriate that this last video will cover Eschatology, which is the doctrine of the last things. As we mentioned a few weeks ago, Eschatology covers the ending of this age and the life of the eternal age which is still to come. It covers the destiny of individuals and the destiny of the universe as a whole. Now, even though eschatology means doctrine of the last things, and even though this is the doctrine that's typically covered last in systematic theology, I want to point out that in a very important sense, eschatology is first. Let me explain what I mean by that. The things that we talk about in eschatology are not some sort of afterthought. They're not a random result or endpoint, but rather they're God's design and goal towards which everything has been moving since the very beginning. If you go to a factory and go to the end of the assembly line, the product that you'll find at the end of the line is that way because it was designed that way before the assembly line was even built. And the entire assembly line is there for the reason of producing that final product. In the same way, God planned our redemption and its results, the things we're talking about in eschatology, He planned from the very beginning. 1 Peter tells us that Christ is a sacrificial lamb chosen before the foundation of the world and then revealed in history. And Revelation tells us that Jesus was slain from the foundation of the world. So the things we're talking about in eschatology have been God's goal and design from the very start. All of history is the outworking of God's plan, and it's going somewhere. And eschatology describes where it's all going. See, God never intended that humanity should remain in the paradise of the Garden of Eden. He has something even better planned. And all of history, God is working everything towards that goal. And we're encouraged that no matter how bad our experiences are now, it will be worth it because of the end towards which we're moving. Paul encouraged the Corinthians by writing, "Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we're wasting away, yet inwardly we're being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." And he encouraged the Romans. He says, "I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us." It will be worth it all. Therefore, eschatology is not primarily about, fortune telling or mapping out the future. Rather, it's encouragement to persevere and hope, because our God is faithful to fulfill His purposes. One of the primary categories of eschatology is the eternal destiny of individuals. Whenever someone dies in this age, and everyone together at the end of the age will stand before Jesus for judgment. And we will all eventually experience one of only two destinies. Those who trusted in Jesus will spend eternity in God's presence. We will experience a resurrection like Christ's resurrection, to be like Him in an eternal resurrection body. And we will be forever removed from all sorrow and pain, experiencing God Himself unmediated and face to face, and knowing eternal joy. But those who did not believe in Jesus will spend eternity separated from God. They will experience unending torment that Jesus described as eternal fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And Revelation says that the smoke of their torment will go up forever. Now, many people dislike and deny the doctrine of hell. And it's very dislikable. However, it's clearly stated by Jesus himself and in many other places in the Bible. And our denial will not make it go away. I think it would be much wiser to let the doctrine of our eternal destiny motivate us to pursue God, to flee from all evil, and to do all that we can to convince those around us to do likewise. The other major section of eschatology is describing the events that will happen at the end of this age, the events that bring this age to a conclusion. Now, there's some of these ideas that have a certain level of uncertainty because we just haven't experienced them yet, and the way the Bible describes them could be interpreted in more than one way. And therefore, some of these things are disputed, but there are some things that are clearly certain. First, let me talk about the uncertain things. First of all, the timing of these events is not known. Jesus says that no one knows the day or the hour when these things will take place. Now, every so often, someone publicly claims to know a specific date when the world will end. And not surprisingly, they're always proved to be wrong. But also, the relative order of events in the last time is often debated. For instance, in 1 Thessalonians, Paul wrote that at his return, we will be caught up into the clouds to meet Christ in the air. This is typically called the rapture. Not so much today, but a generation ago, it was vigorously debated whether this would take place before or after a time of intense persecution and punishment. And consequently, whether Christians would experience this terrible time or not. And more currently, the debate is about the relative timing of the events described in Revelation chapter 20, where it speaks of a 1,000-year period where Satan is bound and inactive on earth. Some people believe that this period, which is called the millennium, that it will take place after Christ's return. Some people believe that Christ will return after this period. And some people believe that this description in Revelation 20 is not to be taken literally, but symbolically represents the church's progress in this current age. In general, there's two general approaches to understanding all the events of the end of time. One approach sees the world as gradually getting better and better until the return of Christ. And this takes place because of the influence of the church and the progress of the gospel invading every corner of the world and making it better. So believers are victorious in changing the world in preparation for the end in this view. Now, this particular approach has relatively fewer adherents today than it did when there was times of great revival, church growth, and prosperity. The other approach sees the world as getting progressively worse over time until Christ returns. Now, in one version of this scenario, believers are spared from the full brunt of society's decline. And in the other version, believers go through it, but they're protected and sustained through the time of intense tribulation by God Himself. And in this second view, it will be a time of testing that will distinguish true believers from phony believers. Now, to me, the biblical evidence seems to be fairly strong that at the end, society will be characterized by evil and idolatry. But even in the midst of this, even if there is martyrdom and suffering, God will be faithful to sustain His people until the very end. And now let me mention something that is certain. Almost every Bible Christian is in complete agreement that Christ will return. And He will return bodily and visibly. And at His return, He will bring this current age to an end. He will make everything right. He will bring all things into judgment. And He will war victoriously over every force of evil. He will vindicate faithful believers. And He will publicly demonstrate His power and lordship over the entire universe. And He will remake all heaven and earth. Now, we only have a vague, general perception and description what this will be like. But we can be assured that it's going to be far better than anything we could even imagine. Our God will be victorious in the end. And all evil and all causes of evil will forever be banished from His recreated paradise. That should give us hope. Let me summarize the main point. In the end, God wins. And if we're on His team, we share in His victory. So what? What now? Let me give you some takeaway points and what you can do with them. First, we should hope. In difficult times, we should look forward in hope that the hard times will not be permanent. They will come to an end. And even in wonderful times, we should never get complacent and comfortable in this world. Rather, we should hold out hope for a better world that awaits us. Second, we should always live with the end in view. We should always be conscious that everything that we do will be brought under judgment, good or bad. Every human will either hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant," or they will hear, "Depart from me, I never knew you." And this fact should have a profound impact on the way that we live. Third, we should watch and be ready at any time. This is the application that Jesus stressed whenever He talked about these things. The end will come unexpectedly, so we should always be ready, faithfully doing things that we will not be ashamed of doing when the end comes. There is wisdom in living every day as if it could be your last, because it could be. Fourth, we should persevere. No matter what happens, hang on in hope and faith, knowing that the good side will win in the end. Fifth, we should continually trust Jesus. Even if it turns out to be true that the end will become worse and worse, and even if Christians suffer persecution and are martyred for their faith, we can still hope and trust in Christ. Even if society is given over to the full control of the enemy and becomes more and more decadent, we can overcome him by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of our testimony, and by not loving our life even unto death. And finally, we should evangelize. Because we know that the time may be short, we should be urgent about reaching the ends of the earth with the gospel. And because we know that every person we meet will either experience unimaginable glory or unimaginable horror, we should do all that we can to help them towards that better destiny. Okay? This brings us to the end of our discussion of eschatology, which also brings us to the end of our survey of doctrines, which also brings us to the end of this class. I want to thank you for persevering through this. I hope it's been informative, but I also hope it's been encouraging and challenging. Please do not end your theological study here, but make a lifetime of growing in your knowledge and your application of solid biblical theology. Thanks for watching.